Hello everyone, welcome to another versus video and a video of me rambling. This time we will be comparing the Venator class Star Destroyer from the Clone Wars in use by the Galactic Republic to the Munificent class frigate in service by the Confederacy of Independent Systems. We will of course go over this match in the usual manner you are now familiar with: history and introduction, general things and aspects, speed maneuvering, offensive and defensive capabilities, and finally the verdict and closing thoughts. So, let's get cracking. However, before you go anywhere, why don't you leave a like, comment, and of course subscribe and click the bell button to become part of the Zerka Legion and never again miss a new video. Remember, these ships will be taken into account in their stock formations with empty hangars. For the Venator, that means no SPAT cannon in its belly hangar. Now, let's begin. The Venator-class Star Destroyer was a ship that was introduced right at the beginning of the Clone Wars around the twilight years of the Galactic Republic. It quickly became the mainstay and backbone for the Galactic Republic and served from 22 BBY all the way through the time of the Galactic Empire, although some rare sightings were even seen around the time of the Legacy era, which spun from 37 to 139 ABY. The Munificent-class frigate, also referred to as the Banking Clan frigate, was first really sighted around the time of the Clone Wars. However, since the Banking Clan was a great supporter of the CIS, there was a good reason to suggest that the frigate was used before the Clone Wars to haul cargo and transport important personnel and more. It was, however, not much around the Galactic Civil War, although the Rebel Alliance did have a few. But it did see a resurgence after the Empire had fallen, under the command of the Pentastar alignment. Now let's continue with the general things and aspects. The Venator-class Republic attack cruiser or Venator-class Star Destroyer carrier was a multi-role ship built by the Kuat drive yards that formed the backbone of the fleet of the Galactic Republic in the twilight years of its time, serving from the beginning of the Clone Wars in 22 BBY to far after the fall of the Galactic Empire in 4 ABY. Around the time where the Venator was built, it had a price tag of a stunning estimated 59 million Republic credits per ship. The Venator had a cargo capacity of 20,000 tons and enough consumables for 2 years of service without having to go to a spaceport to refill and restock, along with a crew of 7,400 and 2,000 passengers in the form of ground troops. The Venator was also capable of landing on a planet's surface as seen in Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith on Kashyyyk. The Munificent class was used as the backbone for the Confederacy's fleet during the Clone Wars, and it was the ship best used en masse because of its weird hull-shaped design, but likewise because a lot of them could be created in a short time to a very streamlined design type. The price tag set around 57 million credits per ship. That meant that it was fairly cheap to produce as well as to operate. It was 825 meters long, slightly over half a mile, and so it was categorized under the typical frigate line of ships that capped at 900 meters or so, and from there went up to cruisers. However, this was a typical estimation and therefore there were variations, and this was not a definite scale, more like a typical rough estimation, so to speak, to have a scale in which to put the different ships. Now, apart from the 825 meters in length, it also had 426 meters in width and 243 meters in height or depth. That meant that the ship was actually fairly big, just over half as wide as it was long, and then again just over half as tall as it was wide. So, this was by no means a small ship. It served roles as supporting ships and their firepower was pretty nasty. However, more on that in a later section. It also served as a cargo hauler for the Banking Clan and was in general a pretty well-rounded ship. It had a good variety of roles which can be both good and bad, but something that is definitely a pro for the CIS frigate is that it was most likely a droid brain in itself, requiring only a crew of 200 personnel to fly the ship. And that crew consisted mostly of droids as well, maybe with a few meat bags far and in between. So, this ship was extremely cost efficient. Added to that, a standard frigate carried 150,000 deactivated droids in its belly, as well as 40,000 tons of cargo and consumables for 2 years. In the category of general things and aspects, it is clear who is the winner here. While the Venator is incredibly good at what it does, the Munificent class wins this round. It wins this round based on how labor intensive it is, or rather lack of labor intensity, which is nearly nothing compared to that of the Venator's 7,400 crew. That is a staggering difference when we consider that every one of those 7,400 has to be paid fees, insured, and the crew compartments have to be fitted to people as well. Compare that to the cheap and expendable B-1 battle droid, then it cannot be argued which ship wins this. Added to that is also the fact that the Munificent class can carry twice the amount of cargo of that of the Venator. Then again, added to that, Venator and Munificent may have been close to each other in purchasing price, however, operating the Munificent class was so much lower. So, in general things and aspects, it is clear that the Munificent class has an almost laughably obvious victory. Now let's take a look at these ships in terms of speed and maneuvering. The Venator class Star Destroyer had a maximum acceleration of 3000 G and a maximum atmospheric speed of 975 km an hour, that is 605 miles per hour, and was one of the fastest ships in the galaxy, even vastly superior to the Corellian blockade runners, who were otherwise renowned for being faster than almost any ships, hence their names. The blockade runners were only capable of reaching 7 out of 10 of the speed of that as a Venator, which means 2100 G. Also, as seen in the Clone Wars 3D animated series, the Venators were very maneuverable and very well capable of turning the entire massive ship 180 degrees in a matter of about 8 seconds. For a ship that size, that's a real accomplishment. The later Imperial Star Destroyers weren't at all that maneuverable if you look at the chase of the Millennium Falcon in Empire Strikes Back. So, in general, the Venators were fast, very maneuverable, and capable of traveling the entire galaxy in a matter of hours. The Venators had a Class 1.0 hyperdrive and a backup Class 15 hyperdrive. This gave the Venators an effective range of 60,000 light years. Venator had 8 engine thrusters, 4 on each side, 2 primary drive engines, 1 secondary drive engine thruster, and then a tiny tertiary drive engine, the last of which I have no idea what purpose it is for. The Munificent class, on the other hand, is fairly standard with its speed and maneuvering abilities, able to go with 2300 G per maximum acceleration. And since it isn't specifically specified, I'd estimate about 900 to 1000 km per hour in atmosphere. Add to that the weight of a fully loaded Munificent, I'd argue that the total weight of it is pretty heavy. And while I know that there per se is no weight and such in space, there's still a thing that takes so and so much power to propel this thing forward. Even in a seemingly weightless state, it takes so much power to propel something forwards, especially something fully loaded. Remember also that the frigate is very wide, and so, especially in an atmospheric scenario, it is very much wind resistant, and that will inevitably slow it down significantly. And this ship isn't exactly aerodynamic. Now, this one's pretty obvious. The Venator has a significant advantage when it comes to speed and maneuvering, and while it may be slightly bigger, the shape of it also creates much less resistance in atmosphere over the huge round shapes of the Munificent. In general, the Venator is much slimmer, and the double bridge towers allows for air to come through that way as well. All of this makes the Venator a much more maneuverable ship in atmosphere, and that coupled with its 3000 G per maximum acceleration, and you have a ship that will get to where it's needed and fast. And we've seen how fast the Venator could turn a full 180 degrees over Ryloth, which it did very quickly, so there is no question. The Venator is the winner in the category of speed and maneuvering. Now on to their defensive and offensive capabilities. The Venators were equipped with some pretty heavy guns, though it didn't have many of them. Its main armament were the DBY 827 heavy dual turbo laser turrets, 4 on each side, and though they were few, they were incredibly strong. Those turbo laser turrets had 2 tracking modes, and could also hit a target up to 10 light minutes away. Also, even though those turrets were so huge and powerful, they could do a full 360-degree turn in 3 seconds. Those turrets alone were enough to rival the full firepower of that of an Imperial Class 1 Star Destroyer. The main weapons had 7 power settings that enabled the gunners all from small strikes to completely and utterly vaporizing the enemy. With this in mind, a few Venators could with ease take down the shields of a CIS Lucrehulk class battleship, the heaviest ships in the CIS fleet apart from the Malevolence. It also had 2 medium dual turbolaser cannons, again one on each side. You actually see it active in the Clone Wars movie where it shoots at Anakin and Ahsoka. To deal with fighters and bombers coming in too close, it had 52-point defense laser cannons that were controlled by a targeting computer. And they were accurate. In general, the weapons of the Venator were incredibly accurate. Also, it had 6 tractor beam projectors and 4 heavy torpedo tubes with 16 torps in each barrel. As far as I know, those torpedo barrels were mounted in the far front of the nose of the ship, and when it came to the fighter complement, the Venator no doubt had a lot to boast with. It either had 192 Alpha 3 Nimbus class V-Wing starfighters, the predecessors of the future TIE models, or earlier in the Clone Wars it had V-19 Torrent starfighters, same amount, as well as 36 ARC-170 heavy starfighters and 192 ETA Actis interceptors, 4 LAAT-I gunships, aka Republic gunships, the I stands for infantry, 24 military walkers, usually ATTEs, that had 2 ATRTs inside of them. Also, it had various shuttles and 1 prefabricated garrison base. All in all, a Venator carried 420 fighters inside of its belly. Compare that to the normal Imperial Star Destroyer, which only housed 72 fighters, 6 squadrons of 12 fighters in each, to be precise. But we don't stop there. Venators also had shield generators, though it is unknown how strong those shields really were, but it is mentioned that they were roughly comparable to those of the later Victory Class 1 Star Destroyers. The hull of the Venators were made of simple but strong and hardened Durasteel, as it was called. Now, the Munificent class was also very well armed, especially for a ship of its size. It makes the armament on a Venator look like child's play, however, it only gets better. The Munificent class frigate had 2 prow-mounted heavy turbolaser cannons, each capable of firing a blast that could completely destroy a 1,000-kilometer diameter moon. That, for the Star Wars universe, is pretty darn powerful, especially for a frigate. But we don't stop there. Oh no. It had 2 equally as powerful long-range ion cannons, 26 twin turbo lasers, 12 light turbo laser cannons, 38-point defense cannons and 8 flak cannons, plus a hyperwave jammer. Whew, that was a long one. All these weapons, however, did cause the vast majority of the power generated to go to its weapons, so that left very little power to keep the shields on the ship up, as well as the Munificent being fairly lightly armored. Remember, originally it was used for cargo hauling and transport. Therefore, the Munificent class frigates were normally used in packs of 3 or so, and as an escort. While they could definitely dish out the punishment, they had a harder time taking it to the chin. And that is not to say that the Munificent is a bad ship, it's actually really good, but it does definitely have some Achilles heels. The armor on these things was too light or thin. In fact, without shields, it could be penetrated by the firepower of ground vehicles in the form of the All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer, or ATTE. And I'm not just talking about the roof-mounted mass driver cannon on those things, but also the regular firepower from the ball turrets. That's pretty darn serious, I might add, and it speaks volumes about how vulnerable that frigate actually is without its shields. So, in this category, it's a tough one. Only going for one extreme, but nearly neglecting the other one is pretty bad. And while I would agree that, and argue even, that the Venator seems to be undergunned, it has incredible range and power behind each blast. And remember that it could be adjusted even with something called rapid firing capabilities. This meant that for a short time it would keep its shields up, but the batteries would intensify, and so therefore could unleash a pretty big amount of firepower in a very short time. We saw that in the Clone Wars episode, with Obi-Wan saying, "All ships, maximum firepower." And 3 Venators fired everything they had on the Malevolence. Now, the Munificent is pretty darn strong in its own right, and it has crazy weapons, actually oversized weapons in my opinion. With the total emphasis on firepower though, it leaves a lot to be desired, in the form of the defense severely lacking. And I'm not just talking about fighters here. but I have a feeling that the powerful guns and long range can do some massive damage to the Munificent. Of course, the Munificent can redirect its shields to front, middle, rear, top, bottom, port, and starboard, but it still has a problem. The Munificent has the numbers to outdo the Venator, but I feel that the Venator has much better range and mobility along with proper armor and shielding. As long as the Venator stays outside of the short firing arc of the prow-mounted heavy turbolasers, it should be fine. So, for offensive defensive capabilities, the Venator gets the edge because it has balance on one side and not nearly neglecting the other. And now for the verdict and closing thoughts. When I first thought of this match, I did my research and more. I thought this was a pretty damn good match. However, now that I look at it, it's not the same case as I thought it would be back in the day where I put the Venator up against the Providence class cruiser. And while the Munificent class frigate has a lot of firepower, one should remember that the Venator's 8 dBY 827 heavy dual turbolaser turrets are creating about enough firepower to equal that of the Imperial 1 class Star Destroyer, or just short of it, also outgunning the Victory class 1 and 2 Star Destroyers. Yet it has such few weapons, but it has very long range and the rapid fire ability. However, the Munificent class does stand a good chance regardless. Remember that its heavy dual prow gun on the Munificent class, 3 to 4 shots from that and the Venator goes down. We even saw that during the Clone Wars over Botha Wui in the same battle where the ground forces were positioned on the asteroids to fire against the CIS ships, which I also mentioned earlier. And because of the rapid firing ability of the Venator and the range it has, I would be inclined to let the Venator have this round. If it comes from the side, it is a sure win for the Venator. With its heavy firepower and targeting systems, it will tear the Munificent to shreds. The Munificent is a great ship and by no means should be underestimated. However, it simply does not stack up to the power of that of a Venator. It is much better suited for cargo transport as well as ground invasions. Otherwise, if the Munificent has to be used in a space battle, it has to be as a support ship, escorting larger ships like Providence or Lucrolk, or both. But in the end, there are too many things that go against the Munificent for it to win this battle. A victory for the Munificent is way too circumstantial, and while it is no doubt possible, then there are too many things that have to align for it to win. So, with that said, I will finally declare the Venator class Star Destroyer the winner of this battle. Of course, now remember that this is only how I see the match. It could go differently. However, let's be real. The Venator, especially with its fighters, would quickly take down the Munificent, but without them, it's a lot more interesting. Do you agree that the Venator will win this fight, or are you leaning towards the Munificent? Let me hear your answers and let's have a good discussion or debate in the comments. Constructive criticism is always welcome. Now, I think I've said what I needed and wanted. Remember that if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and remember to use your hatred to choke that like button and use your anger to kill that bell button and become part of the Zerka Legion. Thank you for watching once again, and as always, may the Force be with you. When I thirst first, great. Otherwise, if the Munificent class has to be used in a space battle, it's gonna be one of those days, isn't it?